So my name's James, or Jim Davenport from the University of Washington. I'm going to talk today about some of my experiences blogging and playing with data and sort of learning about myself. And I think I'm going to just echo a lot of the statements that were made yesterday. I was really excited about the talks yesterday, and I think I have nothing original to add because people yesterday just covered everything, and it was awesome. And I'm sure today we'll have just a lot more really original insights. But I want to talk about some of my own exploration coming from the field of astronomy and data science, and how I've sort of used visualization to kind of start learning about myself. And when I started making this talk about a month ago, when I started playing around with slides and just gathering figures from different blog posts, I sort of started reflecting on where my interest in visualization came from. And I could sort of center on two kind of formative experiences as a child that I think helped make me who I am. And so I just want to share those two with you. The first was my dad giving me his anatomy and physiology textbook when he was in nursing school. And the second was my mom giving me all these spare maps. She's a city planner. And I just wanted to say, for parents out there, these make great coloring books. And so that's what my brother and I did, and both of us are very visual learners now. And I think this is how you sow the seeds and turn your children into awful people like astronomers at an early age. So this is sort of where I began, just coloring. And I think we heard a lot about that yesterday with playing with Legos being a sort of formative experience for many of the people in the audience. Like, we all sort of grew up with this sort of tactile and visual experience. And I think crayons can be a similar kind of very visual instructional experience for children. So there you go. If you've got spare maps or maps of bodies laying around, give them to your kids. So that's where I was, and now we'll fast forward 25 years, and now here I am doing this. So this is a screenshot of my blog, If We Assume. And on this blog, I explore fun, side, silly question projects that I would not normally do as an astronomer. So as an astronomer, there's sort of a well-defined mission. Here I have just the freedom to do whatever I want. And so I let my imagination kind of run rampant. And so I publish on a very eclectic variety of things. So here, just the screenshot is encapsulating a recent post where I just scraped Wikipedia for all the wars that were ever mentioned on Wikipedia. It's something like 1,200 wars or 1,100 wars in the course of human history. And you find that the Afghanistan war is longer than 84% of all wars ever. It's kind of interesting. I thought it was mildly amusing. One of the very, very first blog posts I did, well, the first blog post you do is, hey, I have a blog. Woo. The second blog post I did was this thing called Battery Life. And I thought this was a very appropriate title considering the intimate relationship I think most of us have with our laptops. That we spend all day with these. These are like our best friends. And in this short study, I played with this small data file that I had occasionally kept, this thing that I had started to think, well, maybe this would be interesting if I just kept this data. And I had this little app that occasionally would pop up, and I never remembered to save the data, and I would always forget about it. And so there's big periods of time where I didn't take the data, but it just saved the capacity of my battery. And let me explain what I mean by capacity. If you imagine, this is a terrible analogy, if you imagine your battery as like a bucket that holds electricity, over time the capacity of that bucket shrinks, right? So by the end of the life of your laptop, you can't stick any more electricity in it, and there you have no more charge, and so your laptop battery is toast. And I made this silly little plot. There's a couple hundred dots there. I thought this was cute. But I realized right away that I had more questions about this data than I had answers. Like, yes, okay, my battery was getting worse. Check, good. But why is there so much scatter in this data? And why is there almost like a jump at about 1.5 years? So I just have sort of this discontinuity where it seems to deviate from this nonsense line that I sort of drew through it. And I wish I didn't have these gaps, like I don't want to have to take the data myself because I forget, and it's like backing up your computer. If you're responsible for it, you'll 100% forget to do it. And so I very quickly centered on this idea that I needed to take more data, which is a theme that we've heard a lot about in the last days, taking as much data as you can. And so I wrote this, short little script, and this is literally the script that's running on my laptop right now as we speak. It runs every minute, and it just saves 3 little entries into a file every minute. It saves the date and time, the number of cycles, the number of charges my laptop's gone through, and the capacity, right? So how much electricity the laptop is capable of holding right now. Simple little script. And I made this graph that I think people really resonated with. So in the blue, is again this old data from my old laptop, and when I bought a new laptop, I put this script on it and I save the data every minute. And you can see in black, this is 140,000 samples. So every minute, which means I use my computer 140,000 minutes a year, which is awful. I need a hobby, besides using my computer. And you can see there's a nice continuous decay. The laptop starts as advertised, right at 100%, which is good. And then within the first month, it starts taking a sharp nosedive. And what you can tell right away from this graph, right, so this visualization is an immediate reaction that these are different behaviors, right? Even though the laptop in blue, had been decaying and I had been grumbling about the laptop battery not being what it once was, the new one, which I spent all this money on, was decaying much faster, right? And I knew right away, as soon as I made this graph, I knew right away, yeah, that's not good. I need a new laptop. It's not going to make the 3 years. It's going to die faster than that. Well, maybe. So this started resonating with people, and I put it on my blog, and it started getting traction and pickup, and people on social media were talking about it, like Dig and Facebook and Twitter and things, which is altogether unexpected because you don't expect people will be excited about the health of your electronics on the internet. And Apple reached out to me, and they offered to give me a new laptop, and I said, oh yeah, that'd be fantastic. I'll always take a new laptop. And I immediately thought, well, great, now I've got a third sample to put on this graph. That's the best part, is I get to take new data on a whole new machine, and it was just a 1-year upgrade. So this is a year data in black, and then here I'm happy to announce that the new laptop that is sitting right here is doing slightly better. It's somewhere in between these behaviors. Now, some people ask me, how do you have 105 or 103% charge? And it just means that the bucket is bigger than advertised. They can hold a little extra charge. But the laptop is decaying. And now, again, I have more questions than answers. So I thought I understood this behavior, and now you can see that the thing jumps around, and there's all these sort of discontinuities. There still seems to be about a 2% error in the actual charge value, but it's jumping around. So I don't know. We're gonna watch it. Right now, it's taking data. I wish it was updating this graph in real time. That'd be quite something. But we'll see in another year or two. Maybe I'll revisit this, and maybe well, I'm not guaranteeing. Maybe Apple will send me another laptop. That'd be great. One of the things that I did not expect at all, besides just people being interested in this silly thing, was the response from people on social networks and on social media. And so here's just three, honestly, just random responses that I received, a couple from my blog and one from a German website, news website that picked it up. And what I didn't expect, I had presented this very detailed data set where people really locked onto the visual. And people started sending me, unsolicited, just started sending me their battery information. And I got hundreds of these responses from various places. At one point I made a little graph and tried to show what average laptops were, and it's kind of a scatter. Laptops don't all behave the same, it turns out. People use them differently or whatever. But this is completely unexpected behavior. It was unprompted. And this really, to me, was exciting that here I had this fun visual project that I was just playing around with my own data, studying myself. And people used it as a prompt to study themselves and contribute to this. I thought this was really interesting. And I'll try to revisit sort of this kind of interaction with people here as I go through the talk. Now, on the internet, you have a range of personalities, as we all know. These are very positive reactions. People are excited, they're engaging with what you're doing. The reactions are not always positive, but they're always amusing, right? So you have to take this all with a grain of salt. So this wasn't actually for the battery project, this was for another project called Mach Twain, which I'd love to tell you about sometime. It's not a visualization project, but it's super nerdy. So go check that out sometime, or go Google that. But this is my favorite comment that I've ever gotten from somebody, and so I don't know who this Reddit user is, Poemi, but a lot of people liked the comment. I liked it as well. But I love this sort of, you have to own up to it. It is. A lot of these things that we're doing are, I don't want to say they're counterproductive, but they are sort of sophomoric, and it is just messing about. And I think it's okay, right? I think that's okay. This is my hobby. So I'm not ashamed that it's amusing. But yeah, you have to own it when people just totally nail you like this. All right, so I want to revisit this fact that the script doesn't just collect data about the battery. Right, this script runs every single minute that I'm using my laptop. Again, it's running right now. It's taken, 15 samples so far. And so this becomes a data set to not just visualize the health of my laptop. This becomes a data set to visualize my own behavior, right? Every minute that I'm engaging with my laptop, I'm saving information about myself, right? And I think I really have not even begun to fully understand my own behavior patterns. But here is one graph. I stole this idea from Stephen Wolfram. And this is a graph where I've just placed, instead of placing the dots as a function of time with charge, I'm placing it just the time of day in which I'm using the laptop. And you see these patterns start to just pop out at you. It's in my own behavior. So this sort of white band at the bottom here, I'm usually sleeping. Now I'm an astronomer, so I'm not always sleeping at night, and some of these vertical strips here are nights when I was observing at a telescope and I had the laptop open. But I'm fairly regular about my sleep, which is healthy. You can see there's dinner time up there, pretty well represented. I'm usually working at my desk through lunch. Sometimes I take lunch. There's vertical striping here. This comes from trying to take Saturdays off, or going hang out with my wife. Also a very good idea. And there is this big gap in the middle. And as it's not a quiz, I've already highlighted. This is an internship I had with Microsoft this summer where, understandably, they gave me a Windows machine to use. And so I left the laptop at home every day. And so there's just this big deviance in behavior here, which is interesting. Again, I don't think I've even begun to fully understand the wealth of information about my own behavior that this kind of data set can provide. One interesting conclusion that I found is, since coming back to finish my Ph.D. After Microsoft this summer, I'm sleeping in about a half hour more on average, or a half hour later. And I don't know why that is. I'm not complaining. I'm missing the earlier bus to school, but that's okay. No one's going to complain about a half hour of more sleep. And so one thing that I have really taken away from playing with my blog and playing with data and have really gravitated towards is studying myself. So here is an ancient science proverb that I just made up. Scientists, study thyself. And I think that's really true. That all the blog posts and everything that I've written that I think has done well or resonated with people have been things that that have been very personal. Either I've studied myself, or I've tried to make data visualization that's about people or about where we're living. And I think these are the things that resonate very strongly with people, even when they're abstract things like data and graphs. So we saw a lot of graphs like this yesterday. This is, of course, just a population density map. So this is one of the most immediate ways to study ourselves, and we'll see, I'm sure, more examples of things that look like this today. There are lots of things that you can just sort of reduce to saying that's a population density map. Yes, and that's still cool because it's about ourselves. It's still fun to see where people are. People gravitate toward this. People feel strongly about this. Here I've just compressed it. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this kind of thing before. Just compressed it along the longitude axis. So you're just seeing a histogram along the bottom. And there are interesting conclusions you can draw from looking at a graph like this if you didn't know anything about the United States or life on Earth. You could say that there are these clusters. Humans seem to live in these little clusters, and these clusters have a characteristic size. More humans live on the right side than on the left side, or the east side, I guess. The right and left is arbitrary. The east side than the west side. Nobody lives in the middle, practically speaking. And this is an empirically, a scientific proven fact that you can confirm by asking anyone from the city, that New York is completely number one, and it's absolutely the best. And so that is represented in this graph. So here's another personal thing that I thought would just be ridiculous, and yet people really got excited about, and we're going to play this game just very briefly here. This is a survey I did on my blog. I got about 1,000 respondents from this, and so you don't need to actually vote, but I want to just have you mentally vote. How many days do you wear your trousers or your jeans or whatever your normal work pants are before they need washing? And you can quibble about, does that mean how many before I actually wash them? I mean, I have multiple pairs and I don't do a load but every 2 weeks. So, just work with me here. Put in your head, be honest, you don't have to tell your neighbor, and no judgment, okay? No judgment, it's okay. As long as they occasionally get washed, it's fine. So I put this graph up, and this elicited a really visceral response from people. On average, most people wear their pants for a few days before they wash them. So if you said, whew, I'm in that, I'm happy to say I'm in the upper quartile on this graph. I guess I'm winning. Probably my jeans these probably need to be washed. And there's an interesting story behind why there are actually more women from Reddit responding to this than men, which is an unusual occurrence on the internet. But what I found fascinating was this, very guttural, very visceral response from people related to this one-day bin. A few people swore that they washed their pants every day, and they could not understand how everyone else did not do the same. And this was an example of a graph just really resonating with people. People saw this and were like, no, bullshit, no way. And that's exactly what they felt free to tell me. And I thought these are just some awesome comments that are able to scrape together. Suddenly I feel gross. That's great, we aim to please. Suddenly I feel better about my laundry habits. I certainly did. I felt very validated. My wife and I, as the survey was out there, were kind of debating what the answer would be. Not that we have different laundry habits, but just we were debating what we thought the average would be. And we were very validated that, yeah, okay, you can wear your pants for a week, that's fine. Anyhow, this is a far deviation from astronomy, right? And so this is what I'm all about, is trying to study ourselves and trying to make graphs that resonate with people. Now, as an astronomer, one of the most important tools in your toolbox is always a cup of coffee. I have had 3 this morning already from the lovely providers in the back, and 2 more is probably coming right after this talk. But another very personal study that I've worked on for a long time is coffee, as Chris alluded to earlier. Here is another one of the very early blog posts that I made where I just dropped little dots down. This is the University of Washington campus, sorry, I should say that. And each little dot is one of the university-owned coffee shops. Now, if you've ever been to Seattle, you know that there's a much higher density of coffee shops than this. But this is just the university-owned coffee shops where I could find the locations. And then I just made some average, sort of hacky estimate for how far you can walk in a minute and 2 minutes. And the conclusion is that you are always covered within 2 minutes walking distance of a coffee shop amongst the entire University of Washington campus. Most places it's more like 10 seconds. I mean, there is one literally downstairs 2 floors from my office, so it's pretty quick. And this is very relieving. This is a very important result for anybody who's considering graduate study at the University of Washington. This is the best I can do as an advertisement if you're considering coming to Seattle. If you like coffee, you're good to go. Now, you can't talk about Seattle and the coffee without talking about the behemoth in the industry, the #1 coffee shop in the world. This is the world's coffee shop, really, and that's Starbucks. And so this is probably one of my best known visualizations. Not this is my iPhone picture. But this is probably one of my best known visualizations. A friend and I started scraping together the locations of Starbucks throughout the United States. And we found something like 85, I think we recovered about 85%, 90% of the company-owned Starbucks. So this does not include the little Starbucks stand in the Safeway or grocery store or whatever. These are the stand-up boxes, stores, the brick-and-mortar stores. And we've connected them here with a wire mesh. And I know some people are just going to say, cool, pretty, that's just a population density map. And you're absolutely right. It is just a population density map that people got really excited about because it said, man, look at that coverage. Man, Starbucks knows what they're doing. These people put stores where people are. That's why it's a population density map. That's why it's a good thing, right? It's talking about the locations of people. Now, I've connected this wire mesh together. This is the Delaunay triangulation for anyone who likes math, and that should be all of you. And when you sort of invert these series of non-overlapping unique triangles to what's called the Voronoi diagram, the important part is one of these nodes in this diagram is the anti-Starbucks point. It is the least dense point in America where you're furthest from a Starbucks. And I, got Google Maps out and tried to find if there was a city or a street near there. It's about 7 miles from Alta, Wyoming. So this is Grand Teton National Park, which I actually went to on my vacation this last year. Not to go find this point, but just to, go look at mountains. But it was fun to be at this point. Of course, I had to bring my own coffee. So I had to bring like 3 pounds of coffee with me because there was none there. This is just a population density map, right? And I think there's a fair criticism to be made about making, visualizations that are just population density maps. But when you combine that Starbucks map with this map, this is a population map from the census, you can do this second order thing. And I think this is the important thing for us to remember to do. And this is what made this blog post successful in my mind. When you take each location of Starbucks and count the number of people who live at increasing radii from the Starbucks, so within 1 mile, within 2 miles, 10 miles, 100 miles, you get this, what we would call in astronomy a cumulative distribution, right? So you can see that it zeroes out here. I didn't calculate less than 1 mile, so it kind of flattens out, but it starts to tend towards 100. And the soundbite about this was that 80% of Americans live within 20 miles of a Starbucks. This is a graph that I'm sure Alyssa would agree, this is something that we would just make casually and conversationally in astronomy, like, oh, it's this cumulative radial distribution of blah, 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 whatever. And you just, stellar clusters or galaxy clusters or whatever. This is something that we would casually make, and not something that you would necessarily see in the New York Times all the time or in the USA Today. And yet, this is a kind of graph that when you lead people through this sort of series of visualizations and you tell them that we're talking about Starbuckses, we're going to count the number of people within different radii, then they make that leap. This visualization sort of allows everyday people, I was able to explain this to my grandparents, everyday people can take these technically accessible, right, it makes technical ideas accessible to everyone. It makes difficult and abstract concepts accessible if you lead them through a series of visualizations. And I don't think I've ever gotten as guttural response from people about a cumulative radial density distribution as I ever will get from that, where some people said, that is the most awesome thing I've ever seen. I'm so happy everyone lives within 20 miles. We can talk about what this means for urbanization and the urbanization lab that we heard about from yesterday, where, you can jump back here, that this means that, so this point is 140 miles from a Starbucks, right? But that means that the best you can do to get away from this one tracer of humanity is 140 miles. So I think this is it's really exciting. So another map, and I'll sort of make the same kind of argument here, another map that I made recently that also got people pretty excited was this map of all the airports in the world. Now this is open access data, open source data from ourairports.com, and their end user license agreement says take our data, steal it, use it, abuse it, make whatever you want out of it. So that's what I did. Now every dot represents either an airport or a runway or a helipad or a landing strip or something that is registered as an airport. And again, what you can see is this is largely just a population density map, right? You can see there are clusters of people and there are more airports on the East Coast, and you can make the same kind of arguments. And it nicely traces into Canada. You can see the population starts to decrease as people go north. But this is more than a population density map. One example that this may be tracing things like wealth inequality between countries is look at the distribution along the southern United States border. Look how sharp that discontinuity is. It's not that people don't live in Mexico, right? Plenty of people live there. It's just that they don't have the money to build airports in a lot of these places. And part of this is also that our data is somewhat incomplete, which kind of feeds to why are these Mexican airports not contributing to these open source data sources. I mean, there's lots of subtleties to this argument, but it's not that there aren't people there. It's that there is some other driver going on. It's not just a population density map. Similarly, there are more airports in the flyover states, which is ironic, than you would necessarily expect from the people, and that's because there are all these federal subsidies to build airports in remote places, right? So there's a lot of history going on here. You can zoom out, look at the world, you can study these patterns, why there are interesting gaps. Again, I think this really plays to the discussion of urbanization we heard about yesterday. Here's one that was pointed out to me. I didn't have any concept that this was a thing, but people right away said, what is this line? And maybe you can see it in the bigger graph here. There's this line very faintly across Canada where surely no one lives. And this is what's called the DEW line. This is the distant early warning line that was a Canadian, there's some in Alaska and some over in Greenland, and this is a Cold War era. These are little outposts. These are like little detection outposts that had little runway strips on them. You can zoom into Europe and you can see that the density is very smooth. People tend to live in lots of little clusters and they take the rail, so there's not a lot of these big airport hubs in Europe. Going back to what we talked about urbanization yesterday, you can see there are dots in the middle of the Sahara. This is an impenetrable desert, and yet we have little airports and runways out there. This is fascinating. I didn't realize Bermuda was so far away. I'm not ashamed to admit I didn't really know where Bermuda was. I thought that was interesting, and I'd never heard of Sable Island, but this is a Canadian national park that just has birds and a runway. What excited me about this is the same thing that excited everybody about this, is the dynamic range in this visualization, is that this was just a dot map. I really enjoy, stylistically I like these kind of negative space maps. This is just a personal style, but you can zoom in on it. The file is large. You can zoom in and really get in detail and engage with this. You can see what do the airports look like where I live, where I grew up, where I want to vacation, right? You can engage with this sort of range of detail. And really, fundamentally, you're encouraging viewers to discover for themselves, right? And that is, I think, what makes a really successful visualization, like what Fernanda and Martin talked about yesterday, is they have interactive visualizations which automatically encourage you to play with things. It's a little harder to do sometimes with static visualizations that I make, but you really want to have people engage with them. And people did. There was, again, international people centering on things that I knew nothing about. I can't read either of these languages, but I'm hoping if you can read them and tell me that they're positive, that would be great. And another thing about these kinds of maps, and going back to the population density distribution, is that lay people who would not normally discuss population density distributions or sample bias or causation and correlation kinds of things, start to say, hey, these airports just kind of look like population map, right? And why are there these outliers? And it encourages people who would not necessarily engage with you on a technical level to make these very sophisticated technical pieces of conversation. Okay, I'm going to jump now to a completely different I'm not going to show you another population density map. This is a data set that I think, again, will resonate with some of the people here talking about libraries and talking about art museums. The Tate Modern, which is a lovely museum in London, released on GitHub a very nice open source data set where they had just metadata from most of their entire collections. This is 65,000 pieces of art that the Tate Modern holds. And I said, great, metadata, that's really exciting, I can play with that. And I really locked on to this idea of the dimensions of the art. So I made this graph, you don't need to struggle to understand it. It's complicated and ugly, but I got really excited about this graph. This is on the y-axis is the ratio of the height to width, so the tall pieces on the top and the wide pieces on the bottom. And I just plotted this versus width, and I made this sort of density map, and I got really excited. I got super stoked about this. I said, there's no square art, hardly. Nobody makes square art pieces, or nearly square art pieces. There are none. Most people make 4x3 or 3x4, because I think that's what canvases come as, and maybe there's a slight trend towards more square as you get bigger. I got really excited about this. You can talk about the golden ratio being overly featured here. And many people did not like this. They said, this is stupid, this is ugly. This is too much of a leap for me. I don't understand this map that you're showing me. This is not a population density map. What the hell am I looking at? This doesn't mean anything to me. This meant a lot to me. I thought this was really exciting, and I wanted to talk to people about what these clumps were and if I could find that art manufacturers were making frames in certain sizes or something. But this didn't get any attraction. Nobody was clicking on this. So I remade this plot in a more abstract kind of way, and that was just to make a little wire mesh, a little wire diagram for each painting, each piece of sculpture. So this is 3x3 meters. Actually, it's almost 3x3 meters up here. And this is a terrible visualization. I hate this visualization because you can't measure anything on it, and yet people loved it, right? And this is an example of art becoming data and then going back to art again. This is art. This is not data visualization. This is just art. And so I don't know what the lesson to learn is because I haven't figured it out yet. Somehow I need to balance complexity with beauty, and I failed to do that in this example. And the thing that I did not expect to resonate with people got everybody excited. And so I don't know, there's not a good take-home message here other than you've got to make it beautiful, but try to make it quantitative. I'm still working on that myself. Now, I'm learning these lessons because I'm sharing things online. And I think my thesis advisor would give me this kind of feedback, but she would also agree with me and make the left-hand plot be the better choice. And so sharing things online is a good sounding board because they'll be very honest with you. There are several places you can share. We've talked about some yesterday. Here are a few we haven't really talked about. I know we've talked about Twitter, but it's a great community as well for data visualization. If you're making good viz, or you're just making any viz, put it up on Twitter, put it up on Reddit. These guys are actually, there's 150,000 people on this subreddit called Data is Beautiful, and they are a great sounding board. And I would really encourage everybody to engage in that. Okay, so I'm just going to finish what I think is my favorite blog post that I've ever made. And here is, on the right, this is the data viz. But I'm going to step you through this and talk about this. So this is a data set that I gathered from scraping all of the top 10 bestseller books from USA Today. And so for each little brick here, in fact, I'll blow this up. For each little brick, I'm just showing 3 years on the left here, you have the thumbnail for each bestseller book. And so each brick is 1 year. On the left-hand side is January, the first week in January, and the right-hand side is the last week in December, and then top to bottom within each brick is first place to 10th place. Okay, so first place books are all on the top, 10th place books are all on the bottom. And you can see there's an amazing amount of structure here. Now this all started with me wondering about why book covers are ugly and why they look so silly, and I don't have an answer for that. The data viz did not reveal itself an answer, but I did find a lot of ugly book covers on this. A lot of just ridiculous book covers on this. I wanted to know if there were trends in color. There don't seem to be large-term trends in color, though I'll discuss some of the outliers in that space. You can see that there's lots of coherent structure here. There are these runs, right? So you can see like Dan Brown books or whatever, like kicking ass on the top and staying in first place. You can zoom in on here's just one example chunk that I have chosen to zoom in on. There's so much going on here, so much about the cultural history that's going on in our everyday lives, our conversations that are represented in this graph. So this first place book on the left is a self-help book. I haven't read it. It's called A New Earth, which as an astronomer I can tell you about A New Earth. I have no idea what it has to do with waking life's purpose, but I didn't choose this book. This is part of the Oprah's book club, and there will be an entire Ph.D. thesis to be done on this data set about the impact of Oprah on the top 10 bestseller list. I think that'd be a fascinating study if it hasn't been done. I'm an astronomer, I don't know, maybe it's been done. There's a lot of other cultural tidbits here going on, so you can see there's 3 cups of tea, this is during its infamous decline, I think after it got disavowed by Oprah. And then this is my absolute favorite little gem hiding in this data set, which is Horton Hears a Who. So Dr. Seuss landing back on the top 10 many years after this book was originally published, because of course there was a movie, this is 2008, there was a movie that came out about Horton Hears a Who. So I love this kind of giant data set, and again this is something that encourages you to zoom in and look at the books and look at the book covers and what have you read and how did it perform over time. Now one of the fascinating things I found in this data set, in this visualization, was these patterns of what the books were doing. So this is a great example, this self-help book, where it very rapidly ascends to first place, right? So Oprah makes a mention within a week, essentially, it's on the #1 bestseller list, right? And this is what we've all observed with Oprah being able to just promote books straight to the top of the bestseller list. This stayed for what, almost 3 months. And then you see this sort of precipitous decline where the book will sort of lose about 1 spot a week as it kind of falls out of our collective community consciousness. And in this case, it got replaced by a complete outlier, something that's a total unique event amongst this decade of data. And if you can't guess, this big black streak here is the Twilight Series, which I guess I'm proud to say I haven't read, ashamed to say I haven't read, I don't know. Maybe many of you have read this book series. But these 4 books, essentially, just spent over a year just trading places on the first place list. And they all, mostly in this order, they just completely dominate. So you can see this black swath just dominating the top 4 or 5 spots for over a year. And at one point, I think a box set also joined them. So you could either buy all individually, and those were the number 1, 2, 3, 4, or the box set, which was number 5 on the bestseller list. It's a total outlier, and it just represents a complete change in our behavior that we're being dominated by this sort of pop media and movies. And of course, you get these resurgences as these more movies come up. You can see they pop up again here at the end. And when I made this a couple of years ago, it was in the middle of 2012. And so I just grabbed what I could of 2012's data, and I saw another complete shift in our behavior. So here we've seen, sort of lots of randomization amongst the book list being replaced by just one giant block of behavior. And here is 2012's book list. And this is what you'd call a bimodal distribution, where you have just on the left, you have Hunger Games just totally dominating as it comes out. Whenever the first couple of books just totally dominating. And then, like a knife edge, just changing the behavior, the blank shades of gray just taking over, and again, just dominating and being completely solid in our consciousness. And so this is a great example of people's behavior being represented in visualization. Now let's see, really quickly, a couple other fun things I did with this. You can take every book cover and add them together and get the average book cover. So this is what the cover of my book, if I ever publish one, will be. And it's a terrifying monster of a piece that looks like if you turned it over, there'd be a map of the White House with a treasure map on it or something. If you add all these together, if you take this like a bucket of paint and swirl it together, you get what's the average color of a book. This is not the most common color, that's a subtle difference. But the average color of a book, which I call bestseller brown. So this is the color, ironically about the same color as the jacket on our Ph.D. theses at University of Washington, which maybe is a reminder to me to go back to work. And then a visualization I won't unpack too much, which is just the variation of books as a function of time, as a function of rank here. So the first place books vary very little, right? That means there's persistence in the first place books. The 10th place books just jumble about a lot. I don't have time to unpack this that much. And this is another great example of visualization where I had a couple interesting beginning questions, and now that I've finished, I have more questions than I started with, and maybe that's the sign of a really good visualization. Now, as I've been playing with visualization, here's a couple of themes we've talked about yesterday. These are things that I did not expect to care about. I did not expect to care about map projections, and yet these are all projections that I've seen in the astronomical literature. Well, okay, that's not true. I made this GOES homolocine just because it looks cool. And I learned about a new map projection yesterday, which is pretty neat. And then color schemes, like what was talked about yesterday in the astronomy medicine project. I didn't expect to care about color schemes. I was also raised in the Church of Rainbow and now have weaned myself off, and so this is on the left, it's the cube helix color scheme, which I'm very proud of and I love. Anyways, these are things that I think astronomers and scientists aren't expecting to care about. The public certainly doesn't think they care about, but I think as visualization people, we have a duty to think about these kinds of considerations and be conscientious about what we're using and choosing in our visuals. And so I just want to close with that sentiment that making good visualizations is hard. We've talked a lot about strategy and technique and medium. It's hard. It's hard. It's a lot of work, and we would love to make that more accessible and approachable to people. Asking good visual questions is even harder, right? So you can make a population density map, but so what? Right? Asking a question which has some visual meaning, using an example of the population density map, asking something where the population density matters is even harder. But communicating ideas with people that are very complex and technical is what visualization does so well, and I think that makes it very much worth the effort. And that's where I'll end.